Now I'm going to show you how to modify a tie rod, also known as a ball and socket joint that's inside the part. It's also known as a ball joint. It's the same principle. It's a component that's used on a IFS, independent front suspension, and it promotes flex in the suspension. We're going to modify this tie rod to increase its performance. By doing so, it will provide longevity and durability from the tie rod performance. Today, most OEM and aftermarket part provider will provide you with a quality part, but it's up to you to upkeep the performance and quality of that part. In this episode, we will address this issue by installing a greasable fitting into the tie rod. By doing so, we can pump grease with a grease gun into the tie rod. This will remove the old grease while new grease coat the inside of the ball and socket compartment. Grease in the ball joint are very important in preventing friction and rust caused by moisture buildup. So now let's proceed and perform our modification. Now we're going to use 2 drill bits to make our modification. We're going to use a small pilot bit to guide us with a hole, and then we're going to make a final cut with a 7/32 inch drill bit. First, we're going to start with a center punch. Make sure we make a guide hole. Now you will know when you finish drilling the hole because the bit will drop a little. That drop is the bit trying to hit the top of the ball inside the ball joint. So you have to run the drill very slow. Try not to damage the ball inside the socket. It's kind of hard to do that. Now I'm going to take this magnet. It'll be good if you have a magnetic drill bit. This way you could grab all the shaving while you're cutting the metal. You don't have to worry because no metal is going to get into the ball joint socket. So we're going to use this magnet and we're going to pick up all the little shaving around we have cut. And then we'll make our final cut with a 7/32 inch drill bit. That's it. Now we're going to take the little grease fitting. On the bottom of it, you're going to notice some threads. Now you don't really have to make the threads in here because these threads are going to cut their way right into position. Now you can also drill the tie rod in this position. You want to put a lot of grease on the tip of the drill bit, and you want to run the drill slowly so the grease does not splatter off the bit. While you're running the bit into the hole, all the shaving is going to get caught up inside the grease and the rest of the shaving will fall to the ground. So if you don't have a magnet, you could try it this way too. Now we have 2 standard grease fittings that is normally used in ball joint and tie rod. This one here is a 7mm with the short thread, and this one is an 8mm with the long thread. We're going to want to use a 7mm with the short thread. Reason we're using the short thread is that we don't want this portion of the grease fitting to strike the ball inside the ball and socket joint when it's moving. We also have a dust cover. This is a newly manufactured ball joint by Moog, and as you can see, they have already made the provision for the grease fitting. Now we must measure for clearance inside the ball joint. So the clearance, the depth of the grease fitting is around 3mm. And the depth of the hole we have drilled is about 5mm, which is 2/10 of an inch. Now once we subtract those two figures, it's going to give us about 1.5mm clearance between the bottom of the grease fitting and the ball inside the joint. That's enough clearance for the grease to flow. You need to make sure you check that. You could do that by just taking a drill bit also and just moving it inside the hole, some grease. You see how the grease build up on it, and then you just compare it to the threads. What you want is you want this to have more depth than the grease fitting. This will allow clearance for the grease to flow. You also want to make sure when you install your grease fitting, you're able to move this freely with no kind of grinding or dragging inside. You will know if you have clearance on the ball joint because you will see the rise on the tie rod. The rise will indicate there is clearance in there to put a grease fitting. So most of them have that, so you don't have to worry about that. Now we're going to install the 7mm grease fitting. You're going to need a 7mm socket, a short socket, 6-point. We're going to install the grease fitting into the socket. You want to use a short socket because you don't want the grease fitting to push back into the socket. You want it to extend with a little thread. We're also going to place the dust cover. Now when you're installing the fitting, you want to press down on the tool and turn so the thread will catch. Like that. Now you have a dust cover, we could cover the fitting. Now we have to make a provision on this ball joint, this tie rod, for the grease to exit, because when this tie rod is installed, it's completely sealed and it does not allow anything to go in or come out. So we're gonna modify the boot on the now on the newly manufactured ball joint. We have our hole for the grease fitting, and you could also see the manufacturer made a modification in the boot with a hole. That will be an exit for the grease when grease is applied to the grease fitting. So we want to do the same thing to this boot. We just have to make a port so the old grease could exit. And what we're going to use for that is I've heated a solder gun, and we're going to place it By melting the rubber, it's going to help when you're greasing the fitting, because this boot is going to get packed up with grease, and if you just take a nail or something and puncture it, chances are the grease will cause the boot to split, and then you will damage the boot. So the reason why we're burning it is so that the rubber cook, and by doing so the circumference of the hole will have a seal and the rubber boot will not split when you pack grease into the joint. So we have taken a seal tie rod and turned it into a serviceable tie rod. A serviceable tie rod will always last longer than a seal tie rod, because a seal tie rod cannot be taken care of and it cannot be serviced. But this tie rod can, and by doing so, it will most likely last you a lifetime. Now, thank you for watching my video, and please stay tuned.